Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We'll get started in just 1 second. So hold tight for 1 second. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm Natalie Swachina, the the Education Residency Director here at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. And before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Karanakon, the Kowik-Kan, of the Atapaka Ishak Sana, for which today we are learning and working and organizing today. So today is our first in our series of resident artist talks for our 2021 cycle. And we're really excited to begin this cycle, which has started in unprecedented times, virtually and closed to the public. But we are excited now that we are open to the public 3 days a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You can make a reservation on our website, crafthouston.org. And additionally, all of our residency studios are open each Saturday from 10 to 5. So please, come back and visit us in person one day. We'd love to have you back. But until then, let's learn a little bit more about our resident artist in this virtual program. So today we're going to visit with both Kirstin Willders and Nicolle LaMere, who have been at the residency program now for a few months. Nicole's been here since March and will be finishing her residency the end of this month. And Kirstin joined us in August. We'll have our typical 20-minute presentation format with some time at the end for questions for our residents. Please drop any questions you have in our Facebook chat function, and I'll make sure that the residents can answer them. Any questions we don't get to on air, we will answer later in our Facebook chat. So first up, I want to turn over our stage to Kirstin Willders. 1 second. Let's see. Kirstin is a multidisciplinary artist working in wheel-thrown ceramics, light, and mixed materials. She received her BFA in ceramics and a BA in art history from Kent State University in 2012. She went on to earn an MA in Italian Renaissance art history from Syracuse University's graduate program in Renaissance art in 2017. In 2020, she graduated from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University with an MFA in ceramics art. She was recently named one of the 12 recipients of the 2020 Outstanding Student Achievement Award by the International Sculpture Center. So Kirstin started her residency in early August, and we're super excited to have her here for the next 7 months. So I'm gonna hand this over to Kirstin.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Thanks for that introduction. And thank you so much to everyone at Houston Center for Contemporary Craft for having me here. It's been really wonderful. Everyone is so kind and generous, and it's been really fantastic being here. So my name is Kirstin Willders. My studio practice is multidisciplinary, as Natalie mentioned, and my use of materials, I generally describe it as ethically non-monogamous, although my primary background is in ceramics and glass. And today I'm going to center my talk around work that I've created over the last 2 years while I've been in grad school. And as Natalie mentioned, I recently graduated from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred in May, part of the COVID class. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Natalie, sorry, you have to enable screen sharing. Okay. So I'm going to turn off my video while I talk, just so y'all can focus on the slides here. My title slide here, I use the pronouns she, her, and this is my Instagram handle. and my website if y'all would like to find me on the internet. I started working in clay when I think I was the youngest one at Alfred at that summer, and I totally reveled in it. That summer was incredibly formative and really instilled in me that a life of art and a life of ceramics was a worthy lifelong pursuit. I arrived at Kent State as a freshman, and I quickly realized that I was not the only one that felt this way. And this quote was written on the wall of the old throwing room in the ceramics building at Kent State, which was demolished in about 2014 or so. And it said, a life of art is not a life of labor, but a life of pleasure. And it was ascribed to Victor Schreckengoss. And I looked at that every day that I threw in that room. So my foundation is based in wheel-thrown ceramics. And actually, to this day, nearly all of the ceramic elements in my work are wheel-thrown. My devotion to the wheel is really due to this particular language or a vernacular, if you will, that I've learned and built up through working in functional ceramics for many years. And these works are part of a body that I use actually to apply to grad school that I made as a post-baccalaureate student at Kent State under Peter Christian Johnson and Emily Duke. My studio practice is deeply impacted by my dual interest in art history, specifically in Italian Renaissance art history, as well as Italian cultural and devotional practices. I've spent about 1.5 years total living in Italy over several years' time. This particular image is the Madonna del Parto, which is a miraculous image at Sant'Agostino in Rome. Much of the research I'm most interested in for my studio practice, like relics and reliquaries, miraculous images, the proprioceptive experience in space and light interaction, is unpublished or necessitates an in-person visit. So I try to travel often, obviously not this year and probably next. And this image is also from Sant'Agostino in Rome. My work is concerned with structures, senses, the sacred, and the sublime. These are themes that weave throughout my work. Each has multiple meanings and applications. I'm going to focus primarily on structures, but I think you'll be able to see where the other themes weave throughout. Structures is most literally the architectural elements I often use. And they're often in the form of classical elements like columns, capitals, arches, and basilicas. Structures can also be a synonym for foundation, literally as in building materials or formatively as in functional pottery. Structures can mean societal binary systems, social constructs surrounding gender, gender expression, value systems, and who you choose to love. The structures in my work are often subverted or manipulated to undermine their traditional function or meaning. Like the series titled The Classical Orders, which are made of 3 classical capitals, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. These pieces are abrasive on the exteriors and instead direct the viewer to the interior space. Rather than the promise of everlasting security through physical support, these pieces instead offer pathways to move forward in other ways. So moving from right to left, you have light, literal enlightenment. In the center, a natural spring of water, a renewal. And on the left, a bowl of sage, which is towards the divine. You can also begin to see through this piece that I favor a monotone color palette in my work. And I use a limited range of colors, usually black, white, red, and gold. Color theory was never my strong suit, so I don't really have a satisfying reason why I tend to stick with these, other than I like the visual vibration between them, and red in particular has a rich history of meanings to play with. With the subversion of structures also comes a breakdown of the physical form. In this piece titled Hair Folly, I replaced what would be the walls of the folly with walls of cascading hair. A folly is an architectural feature that is purely ornamental. It's a farce. A facade is an architectural frontispiece for a building, and hair is a corporeal mask. So this piece represents several layers of facade. I love duplicitous meanings and the breadth of interpretation that they can open up in works. And I've used hair as a bodily facade in a few pieces, like this one titled See and Be Seen, where the wig covers the majority of the piece here. The tiniest inklings of ideas can come from totally disparate places. These are the hands of my friend Lexi, who has "You See Me" tattooed across her fingers. This piece is a triptych of 3 step ceramic pieces that each has individual lighting under a glass dome and an accompanying wall panel. Here I was thinking about foreground and background and how those layers can meld into one or conversely pull apart and one can become more prominent. I was also really interested in creating a reciprocal gaze here so that it wasn't just the viewer trying to decipher the elements of the work. The viewer here is also viewed. I see you, you see me. To that end, other works like this one from a reliquary series, which I made at a residency in Rome, at Creta, Rome last summer, plays on a reciprocal gaze as well. This piece is very strangely physiognomic, although it wasn't originally designed to be that way, with its flowing hair and sort of the single eye at the center. I found that light is also a keen way to break down structure and rebuild it within the realm of the sublime. This piece is titled As Above, So Below. It has the repeating element of the arch throughout, in the ceramic arches that support the surface, in the neon tubes, and in the wiring that connects the tubes. The piece is in the shape of a Latin cross basilica, which you can see in sort of an aerial shot on the right. The 26 tubes filled with neon gas for this piece are insanely luminous and completely blanket the space in unavoidable warm red light. Being encompassed in light in this way is directly relational to a proprioceptive experience of being within a soaring space like a large basilica structure. This light has the power to affect mood as well. And I've taken some cues on light saturation from films. A notable example of this is the movie Spring Breakers, which uses a variety of bright shades to color the film, as well as films that have abundant monotone scenes, not necessarily in their lighting, but just in set design, like this film called But I'm a Cheerleader. Aside from light saturation, neon is a really great material to be able to deconstruct a form and sort of redraw it in line work or almost in immateriality with light, which in the case of architectural features completely undermines the physical function. These 2 works are fairly large scale. The piece on the left is 5 feet long and the piece on the right is 7 feet tall. And the piece on the right is not bombarded yet, which means that the tube hasn't been processed and filled with gas, but it's the same white tubing as the piece on the left, so you get the idea. And this is a series of works that was riffing on the gaze as well as orientation or inversion. Aberration 1, also called reclining column, lays on its side. Lays on its side not as in ruin or in structural failure, but as in leisurely reclining. The gaze on the right in the Venus is translated through the emitted light in the neon work, where the light reaches out towards you and bathes you in its glow. Aberration 2, also called inverted column, is a column that curves back towards itself, almost becoming an arch. The column as a formal element is essentially a straight line. It follows a direct path. If the line is curved and if it deviates from the straight path, it becomes inverted like an arch form. And the domed top that is created is exactly what gives arches their strength. So paradoxically, what is a deviation of a straight line is essentially what gives the inverted line its strength. As I mentioned with the classical capitals, I want to offer a path forward towards strength. So strength of the arch or strength of the inverted column, for example. But I sort of always give a nod to reverence or to foundations. So in this piece, which is a two-parter called Taught/Toolkit for a New Enlightenment, I've created an assemblage of small objects that offer past, present, and future. An hourglass as a memento mori, a flogger and hair belt as a mode of repentance or as a pathway to the divine through BDSM, a bowl of collected objects that represent pilgrimage, an obsidian sphere for scrying, and Palo Santo, as well as abundant selenite to cleanse. These objects are closely related to relics for me. They're the kind of objects used by saints that you would see enshrined in reliquaries. The devotional culture around relics and miracles and myths, and the miracles and myths surrounding them, is totally fascinating to me, and it's something I actively seek out to experience. This image is of the reliquary of St. Peter's Change, which is in San Pietro in Vincoli in Rome. I've worked towards my own versions of reliquaries, mostly incorporating hair in various ways, usually as a marker of the corporeal existence and personal identity. Besides historical relics and reliquaries like these, I also look to modern and contemporary examples of relics and reliquaries, or at least what I consider to be under that umbrella, even if the artist might not. So you have Catherine Opie on the left and Yves Klein on the right. I thought I would share in general what my studio tends to look like. So you can see the reference images as well as lots of material samples on the wall and some pieces I'm sort of testing out or working with. And this photo was from the spring, right before we lost access to the studio while I was at Alfred. Since COVID shut down studios, I've been watching a ton of movies. This kind of research actually plays perfectly into my consideration of foreground and background, and especially for installation or assemblage works where the idea of mise en scene is really important. I think the still, which is from Portrait of a Lady on Fire, exemplifies this incredibly precise and astute mise en scene that I aspire to. Probably like many people, I've been thinking a lot about morality, memento mori, and vanitas. And so watching a lot of films with those themes by directors like Kieślowski, The Dardennes, Chantal Akerman, Claire Denis, Alice Rohrwacher. And then this still here is from a Kieślowski film called Three Colors Blue. This is what my studio at HCCC looks like right now. I've got lots of things sort of queued up and happening. I'm currently working on pieces that deal with the Noli Me Tangere story and visual depictions of that, because I think it's really salient for this particular moment in time. I'm working on a piece that's an interpretation of a miracle of St. Catherine of Siena, and I'm working on some reliquaries in various formats to encapsulate a variety of materials and different histories. As well as some memento mori scenes and objects. Without the weight of grad school, I've been chasing down ideas that I probably wouldn't in school for various reasons, and I'm trying to not second guess myself on that. I think my work overall is becoming more figurative, maybe not explicitly, but in content, and incorporating the body more. I've been also working with pre-existing myth and story more often, and adding more symbolism to flesh out content and meaning. And I just want to end with this quote, which was written on the wall at Kent State. And there was honestly a lot of stuff written on the wall at Kent State. And I think that this quote is really sincere in its language, but cheeky in delivery and meaning. And it stuck with me a decade later. And it says, "And the Lord saith unto Mangus, the sins of the potter shall not be placed upon the cup." And I will end there. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. And here, again, is my cover slide if you'd like to find me on the internet, my Instagram handle, as well as my website. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kirstin. If anyone has any questions, please drop them into our Facebook chat. To get us started, I do have a couple questions. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how you started incorporating neon into your work. I think something that's fascinating about your work, and that also we'll see in Nicole's work too, is that you both are really experimenting with non-traditional materials outside of the ceramic world, such as hair and neon. And then we'll see Nicole with what she's incorporating as well. But how did you get started down that path?
So I've always been really fascinated with light. I have like a huge cache of images that are mostly of natural light occurrences. And so I've always sort of sought out or allowed myself to be open to those experiences. And it wasn't really until I got to grad school that I started trying to incorporate light into my work. And so prior to having access to neon, I was using LEDs and some L-wire, which really doesn't cut it when you compare it to neon. Bringing neon into the practice is really like a natural progression from sort of those interests. And there are a lot of similarities with working with neon, and I think working in the wheel in terms of sort of having to keep something centered and just sort of the way that you handle the material. But neon presents a really great opportunity to sort of play with the differences between ceramics and glass in terms of fragility and opacity, luminosity, things like that. So that's why I started trying to incorporate it in that way.
And are you able to, you have to have a neon studio to work on that. So do you have any future plans to work with neon, or is it more of the, whenever you have the opportunity to? I know it's an extensive process.
Yeah, I would love to work with neon more. I haven't been able to gain access to a studio since I lost access at Alfred, which is really unfortunate, but I do hope to get back into neon very soon.
Cool. Well, as an art historian myself, I really love to hear about your influences, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about your process from the inspirations you have from Renaissance art history, and what is your developmental process like? How are you taking this idea of a reliquary? Are you looking at various reliquaries? Are you just, completely thinking of something new and novel? Like, how does that translate to your work?
I think I just sort of start with what really piques my interest visually. And then also I think part of it is like the cultural experience of it, of being in Italy and sort of experiencing the the daily devotional practices around miraculous images and relics. So I think I sort of start there and with that actual firsthand experience. And it's really difficult to sort of translate that into the studio here because it's a cultural difference, number one. But those objects are so particular. Reliquaries are made to house specific objects. They're not generic. They're placed in locations that are easily accessible, and there's this whole environment that's built up around them. So I try to keep that in mind when I make work and definitely in the display of the pieces. But I don't think there's ever going to really be a point where I can approach the significance of those objects as they're used in daily life or in cultural practice in Italy.
Great. And then I have one last question for you. What drew you to our residency at the Craft Center? We're so unique for our residencies open to the public, and I wondered if maybe you could speak. We haven't had that long of open studios, but speak about, what drew you to Houston? What are you hoping to do here in Houston? And, what's unique about being here at this time and place?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been aware of Houston Center for Contemporary Craft for almost 10 years now. And I've always been really excited about what happens here in terms of the interdisciplinary approaches to craft. And I think with a lot of programs being very medium specific, it's really unique that HCCC really welcomes a wide variety of material and doesn't try to sort of pigeonhole you into a certain way of working or a certain mode. So that was really what drew me to the program. And I'm really enjoying seeing a lot of residents sort of come and go and lots of different modes of working. That's been really exciting. And I didn't realize this before I came here, but sort of the interaction with the curators here as well, or the fellow Maria Lisa, is really exciting to sort of have a different perspective on your own artwork as well. And it's not sort of just centered on other makers. There are other elements to this residency.
Awesome. Well, we're very glad that you're here. Thank you, Kirstin, for such an interesting and informative talk. If anyone else has questions, please leave them in the chat and we can circle back around to Kirstin at the end, or we'll answer them in the chat. But thank you again for sharing. And Kirstin will be here till the end of March. We're correct, till the end of March, I believe.
February.
February, thank you. It's been a day. Until the end of February, and her studio will be open on Saturdays. So please come by and meet her and look at her art in person one day.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Natalie.
Thank you. So next we're going to move on to Nicolle LaMere. Nicolle, as I misspoke earlier, will actually be here till the end of December. So you have 2 months to come visit Nicolle. Nicolle is, from her bio, on a journey to know the cosmos. She works in ceramics and elemental materials to create sculptural objects and installations. She spent her first 25 years in southern Wisconsin on the fringe of suburbia and farmland. Having received a BFA from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater in 2011, LaMere relocated to Lubbock, Texas in 2014 to complete her MFA from Texas Tech University in 2017. After graduating, she participated in the Land Art of the American West program, traveling over 6,000 miles and camping throughout Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. Nicolle has completed multiple technical ceramic research grants, the most recent being the NCECA Graduate Student Fellowship in 2015. She is currently also an art instructor at Art League Houston and maintains a studio at Box 13 Art Space here in Houston. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicolle.
Thank you, Natalie. All right, and that was a great intro. It kind of like covered a lot of bases. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get this presentation started. Okay, and I'm also gonna hide my video so you won't get to see me gesture wildly. Please wait till the end. Okay. So as Natalie mentioned, I'm Nicolle LaMere, artist in resident at HCCC. I am local. I've been in Houston for the last 2 years. I would like to start my presentation always with gratitude. So a big thanks to the Contemporary Craft Center, of course. I started my residency right before the pandemic sort of shut down pretty much the world. And I don't know where I'd be without this. It's really helped me get through this tough time and keep me motivated and focused. Thank you to Sarah and Bill Morgan, who underwrites my studio space here at the Craft Center, the National Endowment for the Arts for providing that extra grant to really help the resident artists through this tough time. My alma mater is Texas Tech University, University of Whitewater, Wisconsin. And of course, like foundations are always so important. Thank you for nurturing my love of art and setting me off at a good pace. Art League Houston, thank you for my first arts job after graduating. Box 13, thank you for welcoming me into your studio and into your community, friends and family. Thanks for sticking with me. So this is a before and current photo. On the left, this was taken right after I got my keys at the craft center. That was the 1st of March. We were open for about 2 weeks and then we shut down for about 2 months. Coming back at the beginning of May. On the right is, unfortunately, the way I work. It's quite messy in here, and I try to clean up at least once a week. Here you'll see my hints of my mold making practice. Okay, so my core tenets: learn the rules, break the rules. I am sort of enigmatic where I have this respect for tradition, and there are portions of my practice that adhere to tradition. I have a strong technical ceramics background, and I'm always trying to learn more about the chemistry behind clay, trying to find new ways to use the material, the consideration for formal aspects. The majority of my work comes in the forms of spheres, as this conceptual idea of the indivisible everything, and vessels as voids, or the all expanse of nothingness. Color, I use black, white, and red. These represent, again, all things, no things, and then the earthly elements. And texture, you'll have to wait and see about that. Hold on. Triumph through failure, always put in the work. Failure is a core to my practice. I push materials to their breaking point immediately and then take half steps back until I find the point where things stay together. I am not a purist in terms of my ceramics practice. I believe that if there's a material that works better for the concept, then that's what you should incorporate or use instead. Leave behind what doesn't serve you. This is important life goals and studio practice goals. There's a lot of fear when proceeding with an arts practice, or if you are trying to make something from the heart that will go out into public. It's always best to try to forge ahead. And of course, the written word specifies while visual language abstracts. I use language in a very specific way in terms of my arts practice. Visual arts is a web of associations, and when I'm incorporating elements, I'm trying to expand a web rather than specify. A little bit of visual history here. I grew up in southern Wisconsin, and nature is very prevalent. It's a very agricultural sort of society, and we of course take conservation to heart. One of my early heroes was actually Aldo Leopold. And one thing I want to mention here is that though we behave in this collecting sort of mindset when we're trying to classify, but what is very important to always remember is that Even though these things don't seem like they correlate, here we have mosquito larvae, eggs, and then plant material. But all of these elements are from an interconnected web, that they all rely on each other, and that if you eliminate one, it will affect the other, even though we might not always see the direct effect. All right, so I am only going to be talking about what I've made in this particular residency, because things have been unprecedented. I think it's important to focus on now. So right here are like samples of my practice. Here we have mold making. This is a plaster mold. Burnout. So this was originally tumbleweed, which I dipped into a liquid clay and then burned out in the kiln. These elements were actually created while I was at Texas Tech, and now I'm revisiting these pieces and sort of compiling them in different ways. And then here I have this really special process that I'll get to shortly. But one thing, again, to mention is that I'm dealing with the representation, the transformation, and the direct usage of living elements. So what is this weird stuff? It's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, and it's alive. So in the previous slide, you saw an example of my fermentation tank and this SCOBY, which was laid upon the surface of a canvas. Now, these are 3 examples. They are currently on display at the Craft Center. These have all been collected, frozen, and then placed. Now, you might be a little confused. Where does SCOBY come from? Can I catch SCOBY? If you've ever had kombucha before, that's the fermented tea, the SCOBY is the living element that grows upon the surface of this tea and then consumes what's underneath. So to grow a SCOBY, you would need sugar, tea, and then vinegar. And so these are all living organisms. What I am really drawn to is when thinking about questions of embodiment, or what does it mean to have an embodied experience. Oftentimes we think, okay, so maybe I'm going to be using blood or leather or hair or bone, but this is the body entire. It is everything, and it is indivisible. People often come through and ask, okay, so we see this thing on the wall, but what does it normally look like? Well, it looks like this. So the SCOBY, which grows over the surface of this liquid, is very gently collected. And sometimes I freeze it to try and kill it. Sometimes I leave it alive, and it then tries to escape its confines. But we'll come back to this later. Okay, road to Glomus. So the first 3 to 4 months here at the Craft Center, I was working on a large scale installation artwork. Here you'll see these tests that I have lined up against my window. Very lovely window here in my studio. I'm very grateful for it. As a mold maker, you're always trying to make the perfect copy. So if I was trying to adhere to what is perfection, you can't see my air quotes, but I'm making them. The edges have to be exact. The tonality must be the same. And of course, we're looking for the readability of the lines. These are all different ways that I've either pressed or poured clay into the plaster mold to try and achieve the right effect. after making a few of these, I was starting to be more attracted to the fragment. And so this image in the center is the new decided perfect for this project. So instead of the top of the leaf, I made a mold of the underside of the leaf. This also highlights the vascular systems of the leaf. We are also a part of the vascular system. And I was so much more enamored with this sort of fragmented edge rather than the clean, crisp edge. And then right here, we'll see this was my view. And what you're seeing right here is that I sort of by hand pushed and pulled chicken wire to form the sculpture, and then I'm laying and gluing these fired ceramic components to form sort of like a skin. So how many did it take? Too many, way too many. This was actually not enough to complete the project. So here I'm in this mode of categorization again. So moving from full leaves to partial to the tiniest bits. And because of the way I was utilizing the molds, they actually broke down quite quickly. So these are a couple different kinds of iterations of the same leaf. And here's just sort of a close-up. One thing to mention is that this is more of a planar sculpture. And what I mean by that is that these leaves are fired in flat pieces. And then I'm trying to use these different sizes of leaves to form these undulations in the surface. Now, I was so very grateful to be able to install this in the craft garden. It's on display now. It doesn't look like this anymore. It is dissolving. It is succumbing to gravity. It is rejoining. It is re-envisioning itself. As someone who in the past has really tried to control every aspect of the process, this was a moment where I really had to learn to let go of certain things. Also, when I'm thinking about when is something done, I'm starting to see in my work that it's never done. It just continues its life without me. So after that extensive process, I was kind of at a loss of where to begin again. And so here's a flashback to a piece I made back in Lubbock, work in process. This far installation, that is 1,000 individual vessels. They're roughly 1 by 1 by 1 inch each. And it's based off of a ritual where I'm making these little tiny packets of paper. I'm dipping them in a liquid clay, and then I fire them into the kiln. As I'm making these things, I'm sending a prayer and asking for guidance. While I was making this in particular, I was really searching for where to go next, what to do next. That's not always an easy question or an easy way to find yourself. So now that we're in sort of the same mode of what to come next, I've resurfaced them from my storage. And of course, first I categorize them by gradient. So for me, all these little vessels are popping out at me with very specific color. I don't know if anyone else sees it, but for my eyes, this blue white is from a reduction kiln, which means there's less oxygen when it's being fired. And then as we come over to this side, this is more of like a creamy white, which is from an oxygen rich environment during the firing. I wouldn't say that the firing method necessarily adds concept or conceptual merit to the piece, but again, this is like a technical aspect of the practice where, you know, for me, it makes a lot of difference. I don't know if anyone else sees that. So on this journey to try to find where to go, what to do next, I've started to sort of compile these into vessels. So we're dealing with a void of voids. These little rings here are the remembrance of the previous practice. So as I plucked them from the unfired clay, they left this little tiny ring. Here we're back at the SCOBY. So here I've taken these relics of practice and I've sort of grown these individual little bits of SCOBY onto the surface and then peeled them away. And I am still looking at this practice and working with this technique. You'll have to come by and see it. So as the title suggests, I've really had to let go of things I can't control. And a part of that is also making that physical, trying to incorporate that mindset into my life through physical practice. There's a well-known phrase amongst ceramicists, and that is to embrace the crack. And of course, I've always hated to do that. I've never wanted to do that. But now I'm really trying to embrace that crack. And as before I mentioned, I'm always sort of pushing this material to this very edge and then seeing how little solidity these things can have before they decide to maintain shape. And here again, we have the leaf fragment molds. I would like to say that I have photographed everything in front of the window in my studio, and the shift in light breathes life into these vessels in ways that I would never have previously imagined. It also gives the objects a different kind of life. It also experiences the day and slumbers at night, and I think that's really beautiful and something to consider in the future. So if I would love for people to come visit me at the Craft Center, and if you don't see me, at least you can see these pieces on view. These are the fired tumbleweed. One thing I didn't mention before is my absolute love for tumbleweed. When I moved down from Wisconsin, I was so amazed by these plants. The fact that they sort of break themselves off from the root system so they can tumble and reproduce. So the idea of having this living being that is active after death was so amazing. And everyone loved giving me their tumbleweeds because they were also, to some, quite the nuisance. So I love it. So these are on view here. There is an upcoming exhibition of my work, or group exhibition, Artists for Artists. This is opening 11/14 at Flatland Gallery. Artists for Artists is a local not-for-profit organization trying to provide emergency relief funds for Houston-based artists. The last fundraiser I was directly involved with was raising funds for Harvey damage, but we're also trying to have COVID relief services in the works. I recently joined the Arts Advisory Board, so very excited. Please stay tuned. And I also had an exhibition scheduled in June of this year, which has been pushed back to sometime in 2021. Please look forward to it. These are my very lovable dirt balls. So these were collected from various either residencies or travels. They all have something to do with a very strong personal experience or memory. And this is just the soil. It is not compressed with any molds. It's compressed by hand. There's no color additives. There's no polishing agents. It has everything to do with everything that has lived and died and happened in that exact spot at that time. So, thanks again. Again, I'll be here till the end of 2020. If you'd like to follow along the journey, you can find me at Nicolle LaMere, and you can check out my work at NicolleLaMere.com. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicolle. We have a couple videos, or a couple, sorry, a couple questions for you. I'm going to turn our videos back on. See, 1 second. So while I'm turning your video back on, we did have a couple of questions asking if you could explain a little bit more how you made the Letting Go series.
I'm sorry. Oh, how I made it?
How you made it. Mm-hmm. Maybe just talk about your process a little bit more. Sure.
No, sorry. I was like trying to mess with my video.
Take a second and finish your video, or start your video if you'd like.
Okay. So I've actually built sort of like a crucible type mold. So I'm building with this translucent porcelain inside of this other mold and firing them together in the kiln. Because it's so thin, it can't really survive on its own. So it needs added support.
And then someone else, Brittany asked, was that a cup in your tumbleweed or with your tumbleweed, like in your earlier works?
Oh, yes. So that was one of those little vessels that I made previously as a part of that ritual. So that was a liquid clay that was dipped with paper and then fired in a reduction kiln. It's very important. The process destroys some kilns and is okay in others, which is why I haven't worked with that process as much. More bringing it back from my garage.
So I'm always wondering, how did you start working with the SCOBY? That is such an interesting material to use. And I know you talked about how you use it in your practice, but what even drew it to you in the first place? And I imagine it also must have taken some experimenting to figure out how to even use this natural material in works.
Well, honestly, I was just drinking a lot of kombucha. I was drinking a whole lot of kombucha, and I thought, well, I could make my own. And as I started learning about that process, during my second fermentations, I would find these little tiny baby scobies that were growing over the top. And I felt so bad throwing them down the sink, especially when I knew that they were working so hard to grow. And so I started incorporating them into the work. They are edible, so you could eat them if you wanted. I wasn't that brave.
That's great. just like I asked Kirstin too, you know, you have some really interesting influence. Well, I from our previous conversation, I've heard you have some really nice influences. Could you talk a little bit more about your influences in your work? You know, where are you getting some of your references from? Are there any artists that you really look up to, that work you really enjoy, or even just practices that inspire you?
Well, if this was my graduate thesis lecture, I'd probably be talking about Heidegger. I'm not going to right now. That's okay. Early influences visually would have to be Japanese woodblock printmaking. That also influenced Frank Lloyd Wright, who was a prominent architect, and the prairie style was sort of derivative or a part of his practice, his architectural practice. The prairie style is found in any small town, Wisconsin. So it's that architecture was, you can trace that back to sort of like more of an Eastern aesthetic. In terms of my ideas of time and earthly elements, I'm really inspired by the Olmec, or formative people. Their practice of making objects and then sort of burying them underground, and that they're active when we are not observing them. So ideas of like the things that I'm making, not necessarily always as art objects, but as objects that affect the space around them. I don't know if that makes sense. There's no specific like doing this, like this thing is doing this, or is affecting something else in this particular way, but in general, it is altering space and time.
Well, we have one last question from the audience, which I think goes along in this theme, that Carolina asked or mentions that a lot of your works seem to age or transform with time, and has asked if you could talk a little bit more about that, about aging.
Yeah, so time is really central to my work. I view these things as always being active. Especially when I'm using these living elements like a SCOBY, they are still growing. I've tried to sort of kill them, but they come back to life. So resurrection right there. In terms of taking plant materials and transforming them into ceramic, I am trying to take a biologic process and make it geologic. And of course, that will also degrade over time. Ceramics is sort of like the medium of the millennia. We don't really know what the next whomever will think of when they discover these things. Whether the vessel survives as a vessel or the fragment, it's still going to be around for a long time. And a part of that is what we can perceive in one lifetime and what we're not meant to perceive in one lifetime. If that makes any sense.
It does. Thank you for answering that. Well, I want to thank both Kirstin and Nicolle for spending your afternoon with us and for sharing your work and your practice. And you know, Nicolle, we've loved having you as a resident here, and Kirstin, we're very excited that you've started your residency here. So this is a great opportunity to learn more about both your work and your practice. And thank you both so much.
Thanks.
I wanted to make a couple of quick announcements on our next few programs. So next Thursday, our curator, Catherine Hall, will be holding a craft chat at 1 p.m. It'll be found on our Facebook page. She'll be taking a look at our new exhibition, Breaking Traditions. So our Breaking Tradition. So please join us next Thursday at 1. You can ask questions, get a behind the scene looks at some of the works, get some up close views, all from the comfort of your home computer. And on next Saturday, Tarina Frank, our Education and Programs Manager, is leading a polymer clay jewelry workshop. So that's going to be a really great way to learn the art of polymer clay, how you can blend, mix it, sand it, make it into jewelry just in time for the holidays. And finally, on Thursday, November 19th at 6 p.m., also online, Maria Lisa Hegg, our curatorial fellow, will be visiting the studio of Hong Kong, our latest resident to start the Craft Center. And our studio series is a really great way to learn about the residents and to have a peek inside their studios. Sorry, Nicole, you've been on the screen for this whole time. I didn't cancel your spotlight, but it's just a great way to really get to know our residents and get to know them from home, take a peek in their studio, learn more about their practice, and watch a demo as well. So I want to thank everyone for joining our talk today. This post will be up online later if you'd like to share with friends or rewatch. And thanks to both Nicole and Kirstin. We hope to see you all at the Craft Center soon. Bye.